Imagine going to your classroom to teach. You walk into your room and turn on the light. The classroom is empty. You set your bag on your desk and begin to remove some of the items you'll need for class, including a cable to connect your laptop to the projector. You make sure all the equipment you'll need for your lecture is working. Then, you pull out the assignments you've graded that you'll return to your students today. You hear some noise in the hall as the first students begin to come into the classroom. Usually these students are the ones with questions about an assignment, so you answer your students' questions while other students walk in. The students who are seated at their desks waiting for class to begin are chatting with one another, catching up on their weekend or comparing the answer they're unsure of from last week's test. Sensing the anxiety over the test results, you crack a joke before you begin your lecture. Some students ask questions during your lecture, and you try to call on the ones who never raise their hands. You read the room, and if too many students look lost, you provide an example that might help them understand. But this semester, you aren't teaching in a classroom. You've been asked to teach online.
My name is Stephanie Brown, and this is my Capstone project for Education 696 to fulfill the requirements for Liberty University's Master's Degree in Education, Teaching, and Learning. There are a couple things I'd like you to know before we continue with this presentation. First, I've designed it to be interactive, so I will have some questions for you to answer because I do want you to learn. So I've designed a worksheet to go along with this presentation. The link to this worksheet is found in the description of the YouTube video. I'm also putting it up here for you, although it's much easier to copy and paste the link from the description. Feel free to download this and print it out if you'd like to write on the worksheet, or just keep the window open so you can type into it as we go along. You may want to pause the presentation whenever I've asked you a question so you have time to write. Also, if you're in need of closed captioning, I've uploaded the script into YouTube, so all you have to do is click on the CC button at the bottom of the YouTube window. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this presentation.
From in-class to online, this presentation will discuss how to transition your traditional, in-class, face-to-face course to an online course. We will discuss the foundational aspects of online learning, challenges in the online environment, the learning management system that you might use, how to facilitate your online course, and finally, we'll discuss some tools and tips that you can use when facilitating your online course. Why online learning? The participation levels of online learning are growing, with 5.8 million adult students reported to have been enrolled in an online class in 2016. 14.9 million adult learners have enrolled in at least one online course, 1/3 of all college students. The U.S. Department of Education released a report stating that online instruction may be more beneficial to adult learners than the traditional classroom. It's easy to see why, when online instruction is more convenient and it allows participation from students from just about any location or background. Online learning is able to reach a diverse student population and provide self-sufficiency for learners with exceptional needs who may need additional time to process or respond to course material. Social constructivism is the instructional theory most used in online learning. It stresses social interaction in order to build knowledge. These interactions don't exist in a vacuum. They're influenced by social contexts, cultural contexts, and historical contexts. Unlike the traditional university classroom structure, social constructivism moves the instructor to the role of facilitator, while the students become primarily responsible for their own learning. If all knowledge is socially constructed, then we as instructors must make every opportunity for students to interact so they can share their views, discuss them, and modify their opinions in response to others' perceptions. TPAC. This presentation covers more than just the technology aspect. I'll also go over pedagogy specific to online learning. Mishra and Keller developed a framework, TPAC, that discusses the types of knowledge instructors must have when teaching online. The first component, content knowledge, refers to what is being taught, and for obvious reasons will not be discussed in this presentation. The second component, pedagogical knowledge, refers to teaching best practices. The third component, technology knowledge, refers to knowing the types of technology that can be implemented in the course. These three components overlap, forming four additional components that affect and influence one another. Technological content knowledge is the interaction between content knowledge and technological knowledge. What an instructor knows, or doesn't know, about the technology she is using can affect how she teaches the content. Pedagogical content knowledge is the interaction between pedagogy and content. The instructor's knowledge of differentiating instruction will impact how the content is received by a diverse student population. Technological pedagogical knowledge is the interaction between technology and pedagogy. The instructor should have an awareness of how the technologies she uses can support or constrain differentiation. Finally, technological pedagogical content knowledge, or TPAC, covers the interaction among all these components. The TPAC framework exists within the specific environmental context of your classroom. For example, a synchronous or asynchronous course, face-to-face or online teaching, or, well, you get the idea. Why TPAC? Although you could use this framework in a face-to-face setting, since we use technology in the classroom, the TPAC framework is particularly important in online courses. The accessibility of online courses means there's an increased student population and more diversity in online courses. There are far larger learning demands placed on instructors, and we must be able to facilitate the diverse student population. We need to know what we can use, how we can use it, and how we can teach to reach all of our students. Now, we turn to script. Social responsibility. The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." In a social constructivist environment, learning takes place in a community. We have the responsibility to our students to facilitate our courses to the best of our ability, and a responsibility to our peers to help them in their professional development. Commitment. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Teaching is a vocation, and what we impart in our students is far more than what a paycheck could cover. In social constructivism, we are committed to create a community of learning, a community filled with trust, mentoring, and one anothering. Reflective practice. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Although online courses come with shortcuts, so you can easily replicate course materials and incorporate outside sources, to ensure your students have the best possible learning experience, you must always review your materials, stay up to date on the content you teach, and be open to feedback from your students. Courses should therefore be designed with intent and grounded in thought. Integrity. For we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of man. The Strong's Concordance defines integrity as blamelessness, innocence, uprightness, perfection, simplicity. Those standards are impossibly high, but that means that we have a lifetime to strive for them. Professionalism. In everything, set them an example by doing what is good. In your teaching, show integrity, seriousness, and soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed, because they have nothing bad to say about us. Professionalism encompasses more than just making eye contact while speaking, wearing appropriate clothing when interacting with students, peers, or administrators, and responding to students in a timely manner. It also includes continuing professional development, producing high-quality materials, and staying up to date on the content you teach. Now that you've learned about script, look at your worksheet and write down how you can adhere to each disposition as an instructor of an online course. There are three foundational aspects of online learning: motivation, engagement, and rapport. Motivation has been found to be the most enduring and impactful asset to student learning, and is even more important in online settings than in the traditional classroom because of the constructivist framework. Intrinsic motivation has been found to lead to more exploratory behaviors, deeper reflection, and increased levels of self-regulation. How can we as instructors increase our students' intrinsic motivation? We can reduce their cognitive load with better course design, allowing students to expend their cognitive resources on learning the content. We can connect content information to students' lives to make it more interesting and easier to understand. We can design a course that gives students autonomy, thereby increasing their feelings of competency. Finally, we can assist students in developing their ideas. Engagement can occur between student and instructor, student and student, and student and material. Since we have and will discuss engagement among students throughout the presentation, this section will refer to engagement between student and instructor and student and material. Instructors can engage with students through frequent use of communication across various methods, like discussion boards, email, or announcements, among other avenues. This engagement should be a dialogue with students, open-ended and receptive to student response. Natural interaction occurs in a typical classroom, with room for dialogue before class begins and after it ends, during breaks in a presentation, or when asking questions. Online, the instructor must plan for these natural interactions by grouping students for projects, facilitating discussion boards, and through formative feedback, all of which will be discussed later in the presentation. Finally, students can engage with course materials by the instructor incorporating many different tools, which will also be discussed later in this presentation. Rapport is the positive relationship between instructor and students. It starts in a top-down manner, with instructors first showing positive regard for their students in their communications. Instructors can establish a sense of trustworthiness with their students by being organized and dependable throughout the course. Instructors should remain accessible and flexible, understanding that their students come from all backgrounds with different responsibilities and life circumstances. The Community of Inquiry Model, or COI, is a framework that, if followed, provides a sense of community among learners in an online setting. The three types of presence that are necessary for students to feel like they're in a community are social presence, teaching presence, and cognitive presence. Social presence is how a student portrays themselves as real people in online settings. A student's social presence is predictive of retention and final grades. Teaching presence concerns direct teaching, facilitation of the course, and the organization and design of the coursework. Finally, cognitive presence refers to the acquisition of high-level knowledge that results from discussions. This sense of community has a positive influence on student retention, participation, and satisfaction with the course. Challenges in the online environment. Self-regulation occurs when a student sets a goal and then monitors, regulates, and controls their cognition in pursuit of the goal. Social constructivism informs us that students build on their ability to self-regulate by comparing the quality of their work with that of their peers. Learners who are self-regulated have also been found to be more effective learners. Compared with their peers, they show increased levels of persistence, resourcefulness, confidence, and academic achievement. Self-regulation increases when students' perceptions are in line with their teachers' perceptions. In order to align student perceptions with teacher perceptions, the instructor should provide students the ability to self-assess their work along with a tutor, assess other students' work, discuss criteria and standards before an assignment is due, and provide criteria sheets or grading rubrics for each assignment. Self-assessment. Students must be taught how to self-assess their work through teaching opportunities. Suggestions for structured reflection assignments include asking students to request the kinds of feedback they'd like on their assignments, allowing students to identify the strengths and weaknesses of their work in relation to the grading rubric when they submit their assignment, having students compile a portfolio of their best work, and having students reflect on their past work before hitting a milestone. When providing students with grade rubrics, There should be 12 criteria or less, so students focus on a holistic argument rather than meeting a list of things to check off. Community. In online settings, students learn more from their peers than in the traditional face-to-face classroom due to the routine exposure to peers' thoughts. But community does not occur naturally online, especially since 90% of communication is nonverbal. To create a community, instructors must design an environment that supports and encourages student contributions. Learning management system. Take a moment to write down what platform your college or university uses. Do you have any questions concerning this platform? Platforms. Of all the learning management systems, Blackboard is by far the most prevalent. It makes up 40% of the LMSs used by large universities, small colleges, and community colleges. Note that if you teach at a small college or community college, you are more likely than a large university to use Moodle, which is an LMS that is still surpassed by Blackboard by sheer numbers. But Moodle is rising in popularity due to its cost, it's free, and its usability. If you use Blackboard and have questions concerning its use, I recommend this instructor guide released by the company. If you use Moodle and have questions, you can take a tour of it through the UMass Amherst link or peruse the guide released by Moodle. Keep in mind that these guides are for the newest software versions, and you may have to find the guides for older versions. The usability of the online course refers to areas inherent in the design and management of the course. The goal of usability is to reduce the extraneous cognitive load on the student so they can focus on learning. Many of these usability parameters have to do with the learning management system. Zaharias identified a dozen usability parameters: learnability, accessibility, consistency, navigation, visual design, interactivity, content and resources, instructional feedback, instructional assessment, learner guidance and support, media use, and learning strategies design. Take a moment and prepare to pause this presentation. What parameters might you, the instructor, have authority over as you ensure your online learning course is usable? Two usability parameters we'll cover in this presentation are instructional feedback and instructional assessment. Facilitating your course. Before we begin this module on facilitating your online course, pause this presentation and consider how you define feedback on students' coursework. And you think back to what you wrote. Do you see it as marking student papers or providing comments on a grading rubric? Most instructors do. However, in a social constructivist framework, feedback is a system of learning that builds over time. When we conceptualize it as merely providing information to our students, they find it to be the most aggravating aspect of their course. In fact, teachers see their feedback as more valuable than their students do. Students generally find instructor feedback as difficult to understand, difficult to act upon, and as being vague and lacking actionable advice. Not only that, but this transmission type of feedback actually increases the instructor workload as they find themselves making the same comments and corrections repeatedly because the students don't learn from the comments. Students will have maladaptive responses to transmission feedback, such as ignoring it, rejecting it, viewing it as irrelevant, believing there is no relationship between their internal feedback and the feedback given by their instructor. They'll reinterpret the instructor feedback to align it with their beliefs on how they did. And if they do make changes in response to transmission feedback, they're only superficial to appease the teacher. So, how can we provide valuable feedback to our students? There are three components to formative feedback. They inform the student of the end goal, highlight the gap between the student's performance and the goal, and provide strategies to produce change. When providing feedback, the goal isn't to tell the student what they did wrong. It's to help them reflect on their work and grow. Feedback should facilitate self-assessment and learning, and encourage a dialogue between learner and teacher. There are many benefits to formative feedback, other than a smaller workload and students learning from our feedback. Formative feedback encourages student engagement, enhances student motivation, increases their levels of academic achievement because they've actually learned something, and deeper learning overall. Providing feedback. There are quite a few ways an instructor can design the learning environment to be a system of learning. First, provide regular opportunities for students to seek and act on feedback. You can do this by involving peers in the feedback process. More on that in the next slide. Or by designing multi-stage coursework rather than one-stage assignments so students can apply what they learned in subsequent stages. Second, ensure that everyone understands the purpose of feedback. Third, provide formative assessments so students can enact changes. Fourth, provide timely feedback, that is, before grading by using drafts, or within 2 to 3 days of receiving the coursework. Students should receive feedback with enough advance notice to do something about it. Finally, provide feedback before it's needed by including exemplars of the assignment so students have a model of what the instructor would like to see. Peer feedback. In a social constructivist framework, one way to provide student-to-student engagement is to design opportunities for peer feedback. Peer feedback contributes to student understanding of the subject matter, particularly because their peers may have been hung up on the same topic and can then explain their process for understanding the topic. Peer feedback decreases emotional reactions to negative feedback while also increasing objective self-assessments of their work. Finally, peer feedback increases intrinsic motivation, which, as we covered earlier, is one of the foundational aspects of online learning. One of the greatest advantages of online courses is the ease with which you can differentiate instruction. Some ways to differentiate instruction online are by using formative assessments to gauge student learning and adapt instruction and/or feedback accordingly. Assessments will be covered later in this presentation. Respond positively to all contributions. Include multiple sources and materials to increase the relatableness of the examples to your diverse student population. And always provide collaborative opportunities so students may learn from those with different perspectives and backgrounds. If you have students in your course who are English language learners, ask your students to compile a dictionary of terms to cover terms used in the course that may have multiple meanings. Students who are ELL or have an exceptional need may benefit from visual representations, such as charts, images, or diagrams, to supplement the text. If you are producing a video, ensure it has closed captioning or a script that you can post along with the video. Finally, learn about the student. Try to know more about their culture or their disability so you can empathetically include materials that will address their needs. A second advantage of online courses is that all students are given an equal platform. Yet you may have some students who may need just a little bit more, so they have access to that platform. Discussion board. The discussion board is the crux of the course in which students build upon their knowledge by interacting with one another. The discussion board provides students with more opportunities for deeper reflection and involvement. Asynchronous discussions allowed students to rethink and assess their own understanding of content before they posted their responses. This facilitated reflective and self-assessment processes, gave the students enough time to share a composed thought or question, and be able to reword messages before posting them online. Time for reflection and being able to revisit the discussion messages posted allowed the students to assess their own contribution. The instructor's role in the discussion board is to act as a moderator and facilitator and intervene only to keep the discussion on track. If the instructor intervenes too much, they risk stifling student participation, as the students rely more on the instructor for knowledge than finding it themselves. When setting up the discussion board, The instructor should structure assignments based on the content and what they want the students to learn. If the instructions call for greater structure, students will respond with short, focused posts. If the discussion boards are less structured, students have a greater struggle in trying to determine what the instructor wants to see, but they'll have longer and more creative posts. Discussion boards are unique as they allow instructors to see their students' thinking before a quiz, test, or paper. Instructors can use the information they get from the discussion board posts to amend their instruction accordingly. Assessments. An assessment is a process of measuring a person's knowledge, comprehension, capabilities, and skills. In demonstrating their knowledge on an assessment, the instructor can identify areas of improvement in their instruction or in the student's understanding. There are two types of assessments: the summative assessment and the formative assessment. The summative assessment assesses the learning at the end of a unit or course of study, whereas the formative assessment provides feedback to the instructor and student on the student's content understanding. The surface approach to assessments are usually comprised of summative assessments and used to test reproduction of content, an example of which is a multiple choice test, which is the dominant form of assessments in online courses. Its major disadvantage is it only tests memorization and lower levels of cognitive skills. Yet, it can provide immediate feedback to the learner, is convenient for instructors and students, and allows a better use of resources as instructors spend less time grading. There are ways to take a surface approach to assessments and design them to cause deeper learning. For example, the instructor may produce multiple questions to test the same knowledge that can be used across many tests to allow for test retakes and holistic learning. Further, multiple choice quizzes can be designed to last under 10 minutes to encourage retakes for students who don't understand the material, and to not take up too much time for students who know the material. Finally, these surface approach quizzes can be administered every week for the first 3 to 4 weeks of the semester to encourage good study habits. The deep approach to assessments are used when the instructor's goal is for students to understand course content. Although these assessments are more time-consuming for students to take and for instructors to grade, they lead to higher grades, increased self-esteem, the student adopting a more optimistic perception of their content understanding, and a higher comfort level with the material. Small group learning. Although the social constructivist framework for online courses has students building knowledge as a result of large group learning, the instructor may provide opportunities for small group learning for peer assessments, projects, or other assignments. However, placing students in a small group will not ensure success. The instructor must provide a framework and expectations they have for small group work. Wang advises that the instructor should be an invisible member of the group, ready to intervene if there is inappropriate conduct or if the group veers drastically off track, but not taking on the facilitator role as she would for discussion boards. Finally, we conclude this presentation with discussing some tools that can be used in an online course, some tips, and references. One tool is the ebook. Many publishers are releasing ebooks, which are publications in an electronic format. Although most ebooks are merely a textbook reproduced electronically, some may include audio, video, and interactive assessment features. Ebooks are more easily distributed to students who may live in rural areas or overseas, and they are less expensive than their paper counterparts. Ebooks have the added benefit of increasing information retrieval skills in their readers. Audio or visual recordings. In order to differentiate instruction, you may want to incorporate audio or video recordings to use for presentations, feedback, or building rapport. There are many applications that will allow you to do so. VoiceThread is a cloud-based tool that is used to share media and can allow instructors to record their voices in order to provide feedback to students. Listening to the instructor's voice enables students to better understand the feedback and to feel less isolated and more cared for than they do with typed comments. By using a recording program on your laptop or on your phone, you can publish your recording to YouTube and share it in your learning management system. Presentation tools like PowerPoint or Prezi will allow you to superimpose your voice over the slides so students can hear your voice while viewing the text on the screen. Face-to-face conferencing. As discussed earlier, it's important for instructors to be accessible to their students, and some students may need face-to-face conferencing. You may facilitate this through web-enabled tools like Skype, Zoom, or FaceTime. Finally, some tips. As someone who has been an instructor for and student of online courses, I've compiled some tips I've learned along the way. First, if you plan to repost announcements or information across semesters, don't use information that date your post, such as a holiday, a major victory, or a visitor to campus. Second, don't spread assignment information across different areas to make students search for standards. Third, and related to the last tip, keep assignment information and instructions together so students aren't searching through multiple folders to get information on an assignment. Fourth, let students know if any aspects of your course require different software, like QuickTime, so they can purchase the software or make other arrangements to access the content. Fifth, preview everything you post to make sure everything looks cohesive and there's nothing missing. Blackboard has the option to preview your course from the student perspective. Before we conclude the presentation, don't forget to answer the last questions on your worksheet. Were my questions answered? Where can I go to get my questions answered? What are 2 new things I've learned that I can implement in my online courses? When you've finished answering your questions, press play, and maybe some of the work cited in the reference list can help you find your answers. I hope you learned a lot from this presentation. Thank you.